Alright, hopefully I didn't deafen you when I was playing with the volume levels on the music. Hello there. I'm glad that you're doing better. The music always helps calm me down a lot too. Hello there. Well, like I turned the desktop audio all the way up and then I deafened myself, so then I turned the volume down on the music player so that I wasn't deaf anymore. Hopefully you are not deaf. And I'm just hitting the microphone. Jeez. I'm having a great night. At least you're still able to hear. Oh, well, I'm glad you're still able to hear, because it would be very sad if you were deaf. I would be very sad, and I would have to end the stream because you wouldn't be able to hear me, so what would be the point? And yeah, I think the thunderstorms have finally left. The tornado warning was canceled. It's still raining a bit, but we do not fear rain. But let us get right into our reading. I have a new fire. I have a new campfire for tonight. You ready to see it? Are you ready? I should just do a whispering stream. Then I could be ASMR. I wanna be an ASMR stream tonight. What do you think? ASMR whisper stream. Whispered Lovecraft. Oh. Anyway, that's not the window I wanted to go to, because I wanted to show you our new bonfire. It's a little closer. It's a little oranger. I figured now that it's going into fall and winter, we needed a warmer fire to keep us cozy. I'm glad you like it. Let us begin our reading. I will try not to whisper for the entire thing. The whispering is kind of nice. Actually, whispering makes me think of, there's a cockatoo on YouTube. His name is Gotcha, and sometimes he gets really, really loud. And then Katie, the gal who owns him, will start saying, "Can you whisper? Can you whisper?" And sometimes he'll start speaking really soft. And sometimes he'll say, "I want to do it." And then he gets louder. He is adorable. I love him so much. Because you can see, I mean, he definitely knows what he's saying when he says, "I love you." That little tone, he's like, "I love you." He puts his little head against her, and it's like, "Aww." Of course. You are always welcome to post a link to the stream. You can post a link to the Discord too if they want to join us. I fixed the Discord command, so that should be giving a good invite link. But no, you are always welcome to post links to the stream. Of course, you might want to warn them, you never know what the hell I'm gonna do. I never know what the hell I'm gonna do, let's be honest. I'm gonna try to speak into the microphone for the whole night, because when I re-listened to the last stream, I could hear in there that it was like I moved around the microphone back to the microphone, and then I kind of went over to the other side of the microphone. It was like, for fuck's sake, you're sitting in a chair. The microphone isn't moving. Just talk into it. It annoyed me. It was like, what in the hell was I doing? It's not like I was wandering around the room. It's a stationary chair, and a stationary my ass, and a stationary microphone. But I guess I was moving around. Oh no, actually I know exactly what I was doing because I'm doing it now. I was moving around so that I could read the book on the screen. I will try not to do that. Stationary my ass. Wow, I'm sorry. God, I hope I'm not going to start coughing now. Take a drink. Here's some more ASMR. Darn it won't work. I need a glass booze bottle. I don't have a glass booze bottle, so I can't play music for you. That is sad. Have to end the stream now. I cannot play music because I don't have a glass bottle. You know I'm kidding. Alright, let's start our reading. How long is this? Whoops. How long is this? Whoops. Story of my life. How long is this? Okay, I thought for a second I was missing pages. Okay, this isn't too long. I mean, I say short stories, but it's Lovecraft, so short could be relative. Alright, here we go. This is called The Temple. Manuscript found on the coast of Yucatan. On August 20th, 1917, I, Karl Heinrich, Graf von Altberg-Ehrenstein, Lieutenant Commander in the Imperial German Navy and in charge of the submarine U-29, deposit this bottle and record in the Atlantic Ocean at a point to me unknown, but probably about north latitude 20 degrees, west longitude 35 degrees, where my ship lies disabled on the ocean floor. I do so because of my desire to set certain unusual facts before the public. This is a pre-film found footage story. The thing about the manuscript, it's in parentheses underneath the title. It's like, why did you do that? Like, you could have just tacked it on as a footnote. There's references to footnotes too throughout this thing, and it's like, oh hell no. I'm not gonna read you all the footnotes. Because I didn't see any footnotes, so I don't know where in the book the footnotes are. But I don't care. I mean, okay hand. Don't you okay hand me. Don't you okay hand me. Okay, back to the story. You came here for reading, not for me bitching about the format of the book. I do so because of my desire to set certain unusual facts before the public, a thing I shall not in all probability survive to accomplish in person, since the circumstances surrounding me are as menacing as they are extraordinary, and involve not only the hopeless crippling of the U-29, but the impairment of my iron German will in a manner most disastrous. On the afternoon of June 18th, as reported by wireless to the U-61, bound for Kiel, we torpedoed the British freighter Victory, New York to Liverpool, in north latitude 45 degrees 16 minutes, west longitude 28 degrees 34 minutes, permitting the crew to leave in boats in order to obtain a good cinema view for the Admiralty records. The ship sank quite picturesquely, bow first, the stern rising high out of the water whilst the hull shot down perpendicularly to the bottom of the sea. Our camera missed nothing, and I regret that so fine a reel of film should never reach Berlin. After that we sank the lifeboats with our guns and submerged. When we rose to the surface about sunset, a seaman's body was found on the deck, hands gripping the railing in curious fashion. The poor fellow was young, rather dark, and very handsome, probably an Italian or Greek, and undoubtedly of the Victory's crew. He had evidently sought refuge on the very ship which had been forced to destroy his own. One more victim of the unjust war of aggression which the English pig-dogs are waging upon the fatherland. Our men searched him for souvenirs and found in his coat pocket a very odd bit of ivory carved to represent a youth's head crowned with laurel. My fellow officer, Lieutenant Clens, believed that the thing was of great age and artistic value, so took it from the men for himself. How it had ever come into the possession of a common sailor, neither he nor I could imagine. As the dead man was thrown overboard, there occurred 2 incidents which created much disturbance among the crew. The fellow's eyes had been closed, but in the dragging of his body to the rail they were jarred open, and many seemed to entertain a queer delusion that they gazed steadily and mockingly at Schmidt and Zimmer, who were bent over the corpse. The boatswain Mueller, an elderly man who would have known better had he not been a superstitious Alsatian swine, became so excited by this impression that he watched the body in the water, and swore that after it sank a little it drew its limbs into a swimming position and sped away to the south under the waves. Clens and I did not like these displays of peasant ignorance, and severely reprimanded the men, particularly Mueller. The next day a very troublesome situation was created by the indisposition of some of the crew. They were evidently suffering from the nervous strain of our long voyage, and had had bad dreams. Several seemed quite dazed and stupid, and after satisfying myself that they were not feigning their weakness, I excused them from their duties. The sea was rather rough, so we descended to a depth where the waves were less troublesome. Here we were comparatively calm, despite a somewhat puzzling southward current which we could not identify from our oceanographic charts. The moans of the sick men were decidedly annoying, but since they did not appear to demoralize the rest of the crew, we did not resort to extreme measures. It was our plan to remain where we were and intercept the liner Dacia, mentioned in information from agents in New York. In the early evening we rose to the surface and found the sea less heavy. The smoke of a battleship was on the northern horizon, but our distance and ability to submerge made us safe. What worried us more was the talk of boatswain Mueller, which grew wilder as night came on. He was in a detestably childish state, and babbled of some illusion of dead bodies drifting past the undersea portholes, bodies which looked at him intensely, and which he recognized in spite of bloating as having seen dying during some of our victorious German exploits. As he said that, the young men we had found and tossed overboard was their leader. This was very gruesome and abnormal, so we confined Mueller in irons and had him soundly whipped. The men were not pleased at his punishment, but discipline was necessary. We also denied the request of a delegation headed by Seaman Zimmer that the curious carved ivory head be cast into the sea. On June 20th, Seamen Bone and Schmidt, who had been ill the day before, became violently insane. I regretted that no physician was included in our complement of officers, since German lives are precious. But the constant ravings of the 2 concerning a terrible curse were most subversive of discipline, so drastic steps were taken. The crew accepted this event in a sullen fashion, but it seemed to quiet Mueller, who thereafter gave us no trouble. In the evening we released him, and he went about his duties silently. In the week that followed, we were all very nervous, watching for the Dacia. The tension was aggravated by the disappearance of Mueller and Zimmer, who undoubtedly committed suicide as a result of the fears which had seemed to harass them, though they were not observed in the act of jumping overboard. I was rather glad to be rid of Mueller, for even his silence had unfavorably affected the crew. Everyone seemed inclined to be silent now, as though holding a secret fear. Many were ill, but none made a disturbance. Lieutenant Clance chafed under the strain and was annoyed by the merest trifles, such as the school of dolphins which gathered about the U-29 in increasing numbers, and the growing intensity of that southward current which was not on our chart. It at length became apparent that we had missed the Dacia altogether. Such failures were not uncommon, and we were more pleased than disappointed, since our return to Wilhelmshaven was now in order. At noon, June 28th, we turned northeastward, and despite some rather comical entanglements with the unusual masses of dolphins, were soon underway. Hello, King Mob. Yeah, Bins. Bins will probably make an appearance in this. Good morning, Human Roger. How are you? I like your emoji. Little reindeer, isn't it? I'm gonna decide it's a reindeer. Anyway, good morning. Glad you could join us. The explosion in the engine room at 2 p.m. was wholly a surprise. No defect in the machinery or carelessness in the men had been noticed, yet without warning the ship was racked from end to end with a colossal shock. Lieutenant Clance hurried to the engine room, finding the fuel tank and most of the mechanism shattered, and engineers Robb and Schneider instantly killed. Our situation had suddenly become grave indeed, for though the chemical air regenerators were intact, and though we could use the devices for raising and submerging the ship and opening the hatches as long as compressed air and storage batteries might hold out, we were powerless to propel or guide the submarine. To seek rescue in the lifeboats would be to deliver ourselves into the hands of enemies unreasonably embittered against our great German nation, and our wireless had failed ever since the Victory affair to put us in touch with a fellow U-boat of the Imperial Navy. From the hour of the accident till July 2nd, we drifted constantly to the south, almost without plans and encountering no vessel. Dolphins still encircled the U-29, a somewhat remarkable circumstance considering the distance we had covered. On the morning of July 2nd, we sighted a warship flying American colors, and the men became very restless in their desire to surrender. Finally, Lieutenant Clance had to shoot a seaman named Traub, who urged this un-German act with especial violence. This quieted the crew for a time, and we submerged unseen. The next afternoon, a dense flock of seabirds appeared from the south, and the ocean began to heave ominously. Closing our hatches, we awaited developments until we realized that we must either submerge or be swamped in the mounting waves. Our air pressure and electricity were diminishing, and we wished to avoid all unnecessary use of our slender mechanical resources, but in this case there was no choice. We did not descend far, and when after several hours the sea was calmer, we decided to return to the surface. Here, however, a new trouble developed, for the ship failed to respond to our direction in spite of all that the mechanics could do. As the men grew more frightened at this undersea imprisonment, some of them began to mutter again about Lieutenant Clance's ivory image, but the sight of an automatic pistol calmed them. We kept the poor devils as busy as we could, tinkering at the machinery even when we knew it was useless. Clance and I usually slept at different times, and it was during my sleep, about 5 a.m. July 4th, that the general mutiny broke loose. The 6 remaining pigs of seamen, suspecting that we were lost, had suddenly burst into a mad fury at our refusal to surrender to the Yankee battleship 2 days before, and were in a delirium of cursing and destruction. They roared like the animals they were, and broke instruments and furniture indiscriminately, screaming about such nonsense as the curse of the ivory image and the dark, dead youth who looked at them and swam away. Lieutenant Klenz seemed paralyzed and inefficient, as one might expect of a soft, womanish Rhinelander. I shot all 6 men, for it was necessary, and made sure that none remained alive. We expelled the bodies through the double hatches and were alone in the U-29. Klenz seemed very nervous and drank heavily. It was decided that we remain alive as long as possible, using the large stock of provisions and chemical supply of oxygen, none of which had suffered from the crazy antics of those swine-hound seamen. Our compasses, depth gauges, and other delicate instruments were ruined, so that henceforth our only reckoning would be guesswork, based on our watches, the calendar, and our apparent drift as judged by any objects we might spy through the portholes or from the conning tower. Fortunately, we had storage batteries still capable of long use, both for interior lighting and for the searchlight. We often cast a beam around the ship, but saw only dolphins, swimming parallel to our own drifting course. I was scientifically interested in those dolphins, for though the ordinary Delphinius delphis is a crustacean mammal, unable to subsist without air, I watched one of the swimmers closely for 2 hours, and did not see him alter his submerged condition. With the passage of time, Klenz and I decided that we were still drifting south, meanwhile sinking deeper and deeper. We noted the marine fauna and flora, and read much on the subject in the books I had carried with me for spare moments. I could not help observing, however, the interior scientific knowledge of my companion. His mind was not Prussian, but given to imaginings and speculations which held no value. The fact of our coming death affected him curiously, and he would frequently pray in remorse over the men, women, and children we had sent to the bottom, forgetting that all things are noble which serve the German state. After a time he became noticeably unbalanced, gazing for hours at his ivory image, and weaving fanciful stories of the lost and forgotten things under the sea. Sometimes, as a psychological experiment, I would lead him on in these wanderings, and listen to his endless poetical quotations and tales of sunken ships. I was very sorry for him, for I disliked to see Germans suffer, but he was not a good man to die with. For myself, I was proud, knowing how the fatherland would revere my memory and how my sons would be taught to be men like me. On August 9th, we espied the ocean floor and sent a powerful beam from the searchlight over it. It was a vast undulating plain, mostly covered with seaweed and strewn with the shells of small mollusks. Here and there were slimy objects of puzzling contour, draped with weeds and encrusted with barnacles, which Klenz declared must be ancient ships lying in their graves. He was puzzled by one thing: a peak of solid matter protruding above the ocean bed nearly 4 feet at its apex, about 2 feet thick, with flat sides and smooth upper surfaces which met at a very obtuse angle. I called the peak a bit of outcropping rock, but Klenz thought he saw carvings on it. After a while he began to shudder, and turned away from the scene as if frightened. Yet could give no explanation save that he was overcome with the vastness, darkness, remoteness, antiquity, and mystery of the oceanic abyss. His mind was tired, but I am always a German, and was quick to notice 2 things: that the U-29 was standing the deep-sea pressure splendidly, and that the peculiar dolphins were still about us, even at a depth where the existence of high organisms is considered impossible by most naturalists. That I had previously overestimated our depth, I was sure, but nonetheless we must still be deep enough to make these phenomena remarkable. Our southward speed, as gauged by the ocean floor, was about as I had estimated from the organisms passed at higher levels. It was at 3:15 p.m. August 12th that poor Klenz went wholly mad. He had been in the conning tower using the searchlight when I saw him bound into the library compartment where I sat reading, and his face at once betrayed him. I will repeat here what he said, underlining the words he emphasized. He is calling. He is calling. I hear him. We must go. As he spoke, he took his ivory image from the table, pocketed it, and seized my arm in an effort to drag me up the companionway to the deck. In a moment I understood that he meant to open the hatch and plunge with me into the water outside, a vagary of suicidal and homicidal mania for which I was scarcely prepared. As I hung back and attempted to soothe him, he grew more violent, saying, "Come now, do not wait until later. It is better to repent and be forgiven than to defy and be condemned." Then I tried the opposite of the soothing plan and told him he was mad, pitifully demented. But he was unmoved and cried, "If I am mad, it is mercy. May the gods pity the man who in his callousness can remain sane to the hideous end. Come and be mad whilst he still calls with mercy." This outburst seemed to relieve a pressure in his brain, for as he finished he grew much milder, asking me to let him depart alone if I would not accompany him. My course at once became clear. He was a German, but only a Rhinelander and a commoner, and he was now a potentially dangerous madman. By complying with his suicidal request, I could immediately free myself from one who was no longer a companion but a menace. I asked him to give me the ivory image before he went, but this request brought from him such uncanny laughter that I did not repeat it. Then I asked him if he wished to leave any keepsake or lock of hair for his family in Germany in case I should be rescued, but again he gave that strange laugh. So as he climbed the ladder, I went to the levers, and allowing proper time intervals, operated the machinery which sent him to his death. After I saw that he was no longer in the boat, I threw the searchlight around the water in an effort to obtain a last glimpse of him, since I wished to ascertain whether the water pressure would flatten him, as it theoretically should, or whether the body would be unaffected, like those extraordinary dolphins. I did not, however, succeed in finding my late companion, for the dolphins were massed thickly and obscuringly about the conning tower. That evening I regretted that I had not taken the ivory image surreptitiously from poor Clenn's pocket as he left, for the memory of it fascinated me. I could not forget the youthful, beautiful head with its leafy crown, though I am not by nature an artist. I was also sorry that I had no one with whom to converse. Clenn's, though not my mental equal, was much better than no one. I did not sleep well that night, and wondered exactly when the end would come. Surely I had little enough chance of rescue. The next day I ascended to the conning tower and commenced the customary searchlight explorations. Northward the view was much the same as it had been all the 4 days since we had sighted the bottom, but I perceived that the drifting of the U-29 was less rapid. As I swung the beam around to the south, I noticed that the ocean floor ahead fell away in a marked declivity, and bore curiously regular blocks of stones in certain places, disposed as if in accordance with definite patterns. The boat did not at once descend to match the greater ocean depth, so I was soon forced to adjust the searchlight to cast a sharply downward beam. Owing to the abruptness of the change, a wire was disconnected, which necessitated a delay of many minutes for repairs, but at length the light streamed on again, flooding the marine valley below me. I am not given to emotion of any kind, but my amazement was very great when I saw what lay revealed in that electrical glow. And yet, as one reared in the best Kultur of Prussia, I should not have been amazed, for geology and tradition alike tell us of great transpositions in oceanic and continental areas. What I saw was an extended and elaborate array of ruined edifices, all of magnificent though unclassified architecture, and in various stages of preservation. Most appeared to be of marble, gleaming whitely in the rays of the searchlight, and with numerous isolated temples and villas on the steep slopes above. Roofs were fallen and columns were broken, but there still remained an air of immemorially ancient splendor which nothing could efface. Confronted at last with the Atlantis I had formerly deemed largely a myth, I was the most eager of explorers. At the bottom of that valley a river once had flowed, for as I examined the scene more closely, I beheld the remains of stone and marble bridges and seawalls, and terraces and embankments once verdant and beautiful. In my enthusiasm, I became nearly as idiotic and sentimental as poor Cleanse, and was very tardy in noticing that the southward current had ceased at last, allowing the U-29 to settle slowly down upon the sunken city, as an airplane settles upon a town of the upper earth. I was slow, too, in realizing that the school of unusual dolphins had vanished. In about 2 hours, the boat rested in a paved plaza close to the rocky wall of the valley. On one side, I could view the entire city as it sloped from the plaza down to the old river bank. On the other side, in startling proximity, I was confronted by the richly ornate and perfectly preserved facade of a great building, evidently a temple, hollowed from the solid rock. Of the original workmanship of this titanic thing I could only make conjectures. The facade, of immense magnitude, apparently covers a continuous hollow recess, for its windows are many and widely distributed. In the center yawns a great open door, reached by an impressive flight of stairs, and surrounded by exquisite carvings like the figures of bacchanals in relief. Foremost of all are the great columns and frieze, both decorated with sculptures of inaccessible beauty, obviously portraying idealized pastoral scenes, and processions of priests and priestesses bearing strange ceremonial devices in adoration of a radiant god. The art is of the most phenomenal perfection, largely Hellenic in idea, yet strangely individual. It imparts an impression of terrible antiquity, as though it were the remotest rather than the immediate ancestor of Greek art. Nor can I doubt that every detail of this massive product was fashioned from the virgin hillside of our planet. It is palpably a part of the valley wall, though how the vast interior was ever excavated I cannot imagine. Perhaps a cavern or series of caverns furnished the nucleus. Neither age nor submersion has corroded the pristine grandeur of this awful fane, for fane indeed it must be, and today, after thousands of years, it rests untarnished and inviolate in the endless night and silence of an ocean chasm. I cannot reckon the number of hours I spent in gazing at the sunken city with its buildings, arches, statues, and bridges, and the colossal temple with its beauty and mystery. Though I knew that death was near, my curiosity was consuming, and I threw the searchlight's beam about in eager quest. The shaft of light permitted me to learn many details, but refused to show anything within the gaping door of the rock-hewn temple, and after a time I turned off the current, conscious of the need of conserving power. The rays were now perceptibly dimmer than they had been during the weeks of drifting, and as if sharpened by the coming deprivation of light, my desire to explore the watery secrets grew. I, a German, should be the first to tread those aeon-forgotten ways. I produced and examined a deep-sea diving suit of jointed metal, and experimented with the portable light and air regenerator. Though I should have trouble in managing the double hatches alone, I believed I could overcome all obstacles with my scientific skill, and actually walk about the dead city in person. On August 16th, I effected an exit from the U-29 and laboriously made my way through the ruined and mud-choked streets to the ancient river. I found no skeletons or other human remains, but gleaned a wealth of archaeological lore from sculptures and coins. Of this I cannot now speak, save to utter my awe at a culture in the full noon of glory, when cave dwellers roamed Europe and the Nile flowed unwatched to the sea. Others, guided by this manuscript, if it shall ever be found, must unfold the mysteries at which I can only hint. I returned to the boat as my electric batteries grew feeble, resolved to explore the rock temple on the following day. On the 17th, as my impulse to search out the mystery of the temple waxed, still more insistent, a great disappointment befell me, for I found that the materials to replenish the portable light had perished in the mutiny of those pigs in July. My rage was unbounded, yet my German sense forbade me to venture unprepared into an utterly black interior which might prove the lair of some indescribable marine monster, or a labyrinth of passages from whose winding I could never extricate myself. All I could do was to turn on the waning searchlight of the U-29, and with its aid walk up the temple steps and study the exterior carvings. The shaft of light entered the door at an upward angle, and I peered in to see if I could glimpse anything, but all in vain. Not even the roof was visible, and though I took a step or two inside after testing the floor with a staff, I dared not go further. Moreover, for the first time in my life, I experienced the emotion of dread. I began to realize how some of poor Clen's moods had arisen, for as the temple drew me more and more, I feared its aqueous abyss with a blind and mounting terror. Returning to the submarine, I turned off the lights and sat thinking in the dark. Electricity must now be saved for emergencies. Saturday the 18th I spent in total darkness, tormented by thoughts and memories that threatened to overcome my German will. Cleanse had gone mad and perished before reaching this sinister remnant of a past unwholesome remote, and had advised me to go with him. Was indeed fate preserving my reason only to draw me irresistibly to an end more horrible and unthinkable than any man has dreamed of? Clearly my nerves were sorely taxed, and I must cast off these impressions of weaker men. I could not sleep Saturday night, and turned on the lights regardless of the future. It was annoying that the electricity should not last out the air and provisions. I revived my thoughts of euthanasia and examined my automatic pistol. Toward morning I must have dropped asleep with the lights on, for I awoke in darkness yesterday afternoon to find the batteries dead. I struck several matches in succession, and desperately regretted the improvidence which had caused us long ago to use up the few candles we carried. After the fading of the last match I dared to waste, I sat very quietly without a light. As I considered the inevitable end, my mind ran over preceding events, and developed a hitherto dormant impression which would have caused a weaker and more superstitious man to shudder. The head of the radiant god in the sculptures on the rock temple is the same as that carven bit of ivory which the dead sailor brought from the sea and which poor Cleanse carried back into the sea. I was a little dazed by this coincidence, but did not become terrified. It is only the inferior thinker who hastens to explain the singular and the complex by the primitive shortcut of supernaturalism. The coincidence was strange, but I was too sound a reasoner to connect circumstances which admit of no logical connection, or to associate in any uncanny fashion the disastrous events which had led from the Victory affair to my present plight. Feeling the need of more rest, I took a sedative and secured some more sleep. My nervous condition was reflected in my dreams, for I seemed to hear cries of drowning persons, and to see dead faces pressing against the portholes of the boat. And among the dead faces was the living, mocking face of the youth with the ivory image. I must be careful how I record my awaking today, for I am unstrung, and much hallucination is necessarily mixed with fact. Psychologically, my case is most interesting, and I regret that it cannot be observed scientifically by a competent German authority. Upon opening my eyes, my first sensation was an overmastering desire to visit the rock temple, a desire which grew every instant, yet which I automatically sought to resist through some emotion of fear which operated in the reverse direction. Next there came to me the impression of light amidst the darkness of dead batteries, and I seemed to see a sort of phosphorescent glow in the water through the porthole, which opened towards the temple. This aroused my curiosity, for I knew of no deep-sea organism capable of emitting such luminosity. But before I could investigate, there came a third impression, which, because of its irrationality, caused me to doubt the objectivity of anything my senses might record. It was an aural delusion, a sensation of rhythmic, melodic sound, as if some wild yet beautiful chant or choral hymn, coming from the outside through the absolutely soundproof hull of the U-29. Convinced of my psychological and nervous abnormality, I lighted some matches and poured a stiff dose of sodium bromide solution, which seemed to calm me to the extent of dispelling the illusion of sound. But the phosphorescence remained, and I had difficulty in repressing a childish impulse to go to the porthole and seek its source. It was horribly realistic, and I could soon distinguish by its aid the familiar objects around me, as well as the empty sodium bromide glass from which I had had no former visual impression in its present location. The last circumstance made me ponder, and I crossed the room and touched the glass. It was indeed in the place where I had seemed to see it. Now I knew that the light was either real or part of an hallucination so fixed and consistent that I could not hope to dispel it. So abandoning all resistance, I ascended to the conning tower to look for the luminous agency. Might it not actually be another U-boat offering possibilities of rescue? It is well that the reader accept nothing which follows as objective truth, for since the events transcend natural law, they are necessarily the subjective and unreal creations of my overtaxed mind. When I attained the conning tower, I found the sea in general far less luminous than I had expected. There were no animal or vegetable phosphorescences about, and the city that sloped down to the river was invisible in blackness. What I did see was not spectacular, nor grotesque or terrifying, yet it removed my last vestige of trust in my consciousness. For the door and windows of the undersea temple, hewn from the rocky hill, were vividly aglow with a flickering radiance, as from a mighty altar flame far within. Later incidents are chaotic. As I stared at the uncannily lighted door and windows, I became subject to the most extravagant visions so extravagant that I cannot even relate them. I fancied that I discerned objects in the temple, objects both stationary and moving, and seemed to hear again the unreal chant that had floated to me when first I awakened. And over all rose thoughts and fears which centered in the youth from the sea and the ivory image whose carving was duplicated on the frieze and columns of the temple before me. I thought of poor Cleanse, and wondered where his body rested with the image he had carried back into the sea. He had warned me of something, and I had not heeded. But he was a soft-headed Rhinelander who went mad at troubles a Prussian could bear with ease. The rest is very simple. My impulse to visit and enter the temple has now become an inexplicable and imperious command, which ultimately cannot be denied. My own German will no longer controls my acts, and volition is henceforth possible only in minor attacks. Such madness, in which drove Cleanse to his death, bareheaded and unprotected in the ocean. But I am a Prussian and man of sense. I will use to the last what little I have. When first I saw that I must go, I prepared my diving suit, helmet, and air regenerator for instant donning, and immediately commenced to write this hurried chronicle in the hope that it may someday reach the world. I shall seal the manuscript in a bottle and entrust it to the sea as I leave the U-29 forever. I have no fear, not even from the prophecies of the madman Cleanse. What I have seen cannot be true, and I know that this madness of my own will at most lead only to suffocation when my air is gone. The light in the temple is a sheer delusion, and I shall die calmly, like a German, in the black and forgotten depths. This demonic laughter which I hear as I write comes only from my own weakening brain. So I will carefully don my diving suit and walk boldly up the steps into that primal shrine, that silent secret of unfathomed waters and uncounted years. And that is the end of that story. So that was interesting. Yeah, this took place in it was published in the 20s. What did it say? The note was found in 1916, I think. No, it doesn't say when it was found. The note was written August 20th, 1917. Yeah, the sea is horrifying. I mean, we don't even know what's down there at the deepest parts. Like the Mariana Trench. We have no idea what's down there. There's probably dinosaurs and Bins down there. Bins is down there wrestling the dinosaurs. That's how it is in my world anyway. Yeah, there is something, I don't know. There is something about just endless water and not knowing what's down there. The sea is not our friend. Actually, I mean, the sea is just water, but I would not be surprised if there aren't dinosaurs down there. God only knows what's down there in those deep, deep trenches that we can't reach. I like to believe that Bins is down there with the dinosaurs. Or that's where the aliens are. But I don't think I could ever go to like deep sea diving because I would be terrified of being like left alone in the sea and the boat leaves. Like some of those movies. So yeah, the sea is terrifying. Oh my god. Swallowed my drink wrong. I'm sorry about that. But I had a great white pop out and grab the bag. I mean, that would be horrifying, but also pretty amazing. Well, of course they follow the ships. They know you're going to throw food off. They're like cats. Once you feed them, you never get rid of them. But I mean, that would be terrifying, but also pretty cool. But I think that the sea and the ocean is a good setting for horror. Just because it is unknown. See, now I wanna go out on a ship and feed gray whites. Forget watching for the whales. I want to feed them. Yep, I still have some drink left. So we will go on. I am so sorry. I don't know why I forget that the isolation. Yeah, that would drive me probably crazy. Just like you know that you can't really go anywhere. You're stuck on that ship. Like, I don't go anywhere, but it's by choice. I could definitely not be on a submarine. The closest I got to a submarine was the ride at Disneyland. And that light tube gave me an anxiety attack. And you're like, what? In 18 inches of water? I could not do a submarine. Mm-mm. I like looking at the ocean, and I like listening to the ocean, and I like staying out of the ocean. The ride scared you too. Okay, I don't feel so bad then, because yeah, I totally just thought I was gonna have a meltdown. Yeah, I remember that eel. I remember it was like, I can't do this. I'm in 18 inches of water. God help me. So yeah, I did. Yeah, I loved and hated that ride. The second time I rode it, it wasn't as bad because I survived the first time. And I guess it's like, well, I survived that time, so we can survive the second time. Okay, our next story is The Quest of Iranon. Let's see if I can read this one better. Into the granite city of Teloth wandered the youth, vine-crowned, his yellow hair glistening with myrrh and his purple robe torn with briars, of the mountain Sidrak that lies across the antique bridge of stone. Yeah, the last time I was at Disneyland, well, actually the one and only time I was at Disneyland, I was 17. So it was after I'd graduated from high school. And I still freaked out. So I feel a little better now, because usually it's like, yeah, I was scared of the submarine ride. I'm a wiener, I know. I mean, that is what the eel kind of looked like. See, there's a good horror story. The horror story about what really was in there in that submarine ride. It looks like an old seaman and you hate it. See, write that story. Write the story, the creepypasta of the truth about the submarine ride. Was it still called the Yellow Submarine when you were there? Because I know it went through a couple of changes. I think when I was there, it was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Yeah, when I was there, they had just changed it. I think they had just changed it, because I know something was said about it. It had just reopened. And it was the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I was terrified, and that's all I remember. I was terrified the first time. I said the second time, I was like, yeah, I survived the first time. I'll be fine. I'm telling you, Disney creepypasta. The truth behind the submarine ride. Well, they didn't look like the Nautilus when I rode it either. They were yellow, but the signs said 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or 20,000 Leagues. But they were still yellow. I was confused. But I was also 17 and at Disneyland and didn't really care. What year? I'm not telling you how old I am. Shh. I am eternal. I am ageless. I mean, I already gave you too many hints. Yeah, it might have been mid-change, because I know the submarines were yellow. But the sign said 20,000 leagues. It was 2006. I think it was 2006. I know it was after I'd graduated. It might have been 2005, 2006. I just know the ride didn't, the submarines themselves didn't match the signing. I should look that up. I think it's just you and I here, so we will go and look and see the history of the submarine ride at Disneyland. Okay. So it was originally Submarine Voyage. So the original nuclear submarines were from 59 to 86. The exploration submarines were from 87 to 98. It closed in 98. And it reopened. Come on. Closed in 98. Okay, in 2005 it was drained and it changed to being Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage. I think Disney World, I got theirs a lot later than Disneyland's. So yeah, it reopened in 2000. No, it says June 2007. So it was a year after I graduated that it reopened as Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage. And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea was Walt Disney World's. I am so confused. All I know is there was yellow submarines. I know. Like, why? Is there another? They have a. Oh, there's a picture of the sea serpent. Let me. You will like this. I'm wondering if there was someplace else, if I went to another park then, that still had that it had the yellow submarines. The vessels were painted military gray with black lower hulls until 1986 when the attraction was updated and the exterior color of the submarines was changed to yellow. However, the newly painted subs paint started peeling almost immediately. Yep. Yep, that's Sea Serpent. He had smoked the good shit. But now that's gonna bug me. Does some other park have a submarine ride? It's like... Oh, the only other place we went was... Okay, no, I'm looking at a video of the Finding Nemo submarine ride, and it definitely looks like the submarines. So it must have been the Finding Nemo submarine voyage when I was there. Because that's the same yellow submarines. I don't know. I just remember being terrified of being in a submarine that was in like 18 inches of water. The dankest of seaweeds, that's right. I expect that submarine ride creepypasta. Alright. Back to our next. I don't know why I keep moving around the microphone. My stationary ass is in a stationary chair, though I am sliding out of it. Alright, there my ass is more firmly planted in the chair and the stationary microphone, and yet I'm managing to move all around it as I'm talking. Because I'm a dumbass. I are a pro streamer. Okay. The Quest of Iranon. Into the granite city of Taloth wandered the youth, vine-crowned, his yellow hair glistening with myrrh, and his purple robe torn with briars of the mountain Sidrak that lies across the antique bridge of stone. The men of Taloth are dark and stern, and dwell in square houses, and with frowns they asked the stranger whence he had come, and what were his name and fortune. So the youth answered, I am Iranon, and come from Era, a far city that I recall only dimly but seek to find again. I am a singer of songs that I learned in the far city, and my calling is to make beauty with the things remembered of childhood. My wealth is in little memories and dreams, and in hopes that I sing in gardens when the moon is tender and the west wind stirs the lotus buds. When the men of Taloth heard these things, they whispered to one another. For though in the granite city there is no laughter or song, the stern men sometimes look to the Carthian hills in the spring and think of the lutes of distant Onai, whereof travelers have told. And thinking thus, they bade the stranger stay and sing in the square before the town of Milne, though they liked not the color of his tattered robe, nor the myrrh in his hair, nor the chaplet of vine leaves, nor the youth in his golden voice. At evening Iran sang, and while he sang, an old man prayed, and a blind man said he saw a nimbus over the singer's head. But most of the men of Taloth yawned, and some laughed, and some went away to sleep, for Iranon told nothing useful, singing only his memories, his dreams, and his hopes. I remember the twilight, the moon and soft songs, and the window where I was rocked to sleep. And through the window was the street where the golden lights came, and where the shadows danced on houses of marble. I remember the square of moonlight on the floor that was not like any other light, and the visions that danced in the moonbeams when my mother sang to me. And too I remember the sun of morning bright above the many-colored hills in summer, and the sweetness of flowers borne on the south wind that made the trees sing. O Era, city of marble and beryl, how many are thy beauties! How loved I the warm and fragrant groves across the highly Nithra, and the falls of the tiny Craw that flowed through the verdant valley. In those groves and in that vale the children wore wreaths for one another, and at dusk I dreamed strange dreams under the yath trees on the mountain, as I saw below me the lights of the city, and the curving Nithra reflecting a ribbon of stars. And in the city were palaces of veined and tinted marble, with golden domes and painted walls and green gardens with cerulean pools and crystal fountains. Often I played in the gardens and waded in the pools, and lay and dreamed among the pale flowers under the trees. And sometimes at sunset I would climb the long hilly street to the citadel and the open place, and look down upon Era, the magic city of marble and beryl, splendid in a robe of golden flame. Long have I missed thee, Era, for I was but young when we went into exile. But my father was thy king, and I shall come again to thee, for it is so decreed of fate. All through 7 lands have I sought thee, and some day shall I reign over thy groves and gardens, thy streets and palaces, and sing to men who shall know whereof I sing, and laugh not nor turn away, for I am Iranon, who was a prince in Era. That night the men of Taloth lodged the stranger in a stable, and in the morning an archon came to him and told him to go to the shop of Artok the cobbler and be apprenticed to him. But I am Iranon, a singer of songs, he said, and have no heart for the cobbler's trade. All in Taloth must toil, replied the archon, for that is the law. Then said Iranon, Wherefore do ye toil? Is it not that ye may live and be happy? And if ye toil only that ye may toil more, when shall happiness find you? Ye toil to live, but it is not life made of beauty and song. And if ye suffer no singers among you, where shall be the fruits of your toil? Toil without song is like a weary journey without an end. Were not death more pleasing? But the Archon was sullen and did not understand, and rebuked the stranger. Thou art a strange youth, and I like not thy face nor thy voice. The words thou speakest are blasphemy, for the gods of Toloth have said that toil is good. Our gods have promised us a haven of light beyond death, where there shall be rest without end, and crystal coldness amidst which none shall vex his mind with thought or his eyes with beauty. Go thou then to Athoch the cobbler, or be gone out of the city by sunset. All here must serve, and song is folly. So Iranon went out to the stable, and walked over the narrow stone streets between the gloomy square houses of granite, seeking something green in the air of spring. But in Toloth was nothing green, for all was of stone. On the faces of men were frowns, but by the stone embankment along the sluggish river Zado sat a young boy with sad eyes, gazing into the waters to spy green budding branches washed down from the hills by the freshets. And the boy said to him, Art thou not indeed he of whom the Archons tell? He seeketh a far city in the fair land? I am Ramnad, and born of the blood of Toloth, but am not old in the ways of the granite city, and yearn daily for the warm groves and the distant lands of beauty and song. Beyond the Carthian hills lieth Onay, the city of lutes and dancing, which men whisper of and say is both lovely and terrible. Thither would I go were I old enough to find the way. And thither shouldst thou go, and thou wouldst sing and have men listen to thee. Let us leave the city Toloth and fare together among the hills of spring. Thou shalt shew me the ways of travel, and I will attend thy songs at evening when the stars one by one bring dreams to the minds of dreamers. And peradventure it may be that Onai the city of lutes and dancing is even the fair Era thou seekest, for it is told that thou hast not known Era since old days, and a name often changeth. Let us go to Onai, O Iranon of the golden head, where men shall know our longings and welcome us as brothers, nor even laugh or frown at what we say. And Iranon answered, Be it so, small one. If any in this stone place yearn for beauty, he must seek the mountains and beyond, and I would not leave thee to pine by the sluggish Juro. But think not that delight and understanding dwell just across the Carthian hills, or in any spot thou canst find in a day's or a year's or a lumstrum's journey. Behold, when I was small like thee, I dwelt in the valley of Naroth by the frigid Zari, where none would listen to my dreams. And I told myself that when older I would go to Sonara on the southern slope, and sing to smiling dromedary men in the marketplace. But when I went to Sonara, I found the dromedary men all drunken and ribald, and saw that their songs were not as mine. So I traveled in a barge down the Zari to Onkswald Zarin, and the soldiers at Jarin laughed at me and draw me out, so that I wandered to many other cities. I have seen Stethalos, that is below the great cataract, and have gazed on the marsh where Sarnath once stood. I have been to Thra, Ulernek, and Kadatheron on the winding river Ai, and have dwelt long in Olatho in the land of Lomar. But though I have had listeners sometimes, they have ever been few, and I know that welcome shall await me only in Era, the city of marble and beryl where my father once ruled as king. Okay, good night. Thanks for stopping by. Have a good rest of your evening. So for Arai shall we seek, though it were well to visit distant and loot-blessed Onai, across the Carthian hills, which may indeed be Arai, though I think not. Era's beauty is past imagining, and none can tell of it without rapture, whilst of Onai the camel drivers whisper luringly. At the sunset, Aranon and small Romnod went forth from Toloth, and for long wandered amidst the green hills and cool forests. The way was rough and obscure, and never did they seem near to Onai, the city of lutes and dancing. But in the dusk, as the stars came out, Aranon would sing of Era and its beauties, and Romnod would listen, so that they were both happy after a fashion. They ate plentifully of fruit and red berries, and marked not the passing of time. But many years must have slipped away. Small Romnod was now not so small, and spoke deeply instead of shrilly, though Aranon was always the same, and decked his golden hair with vines and fragrant resins found in the woods. So it came to pass one day that Romnod seemed older than Aranon, though he had been very small when Aranon had found him watching for green budding branches in Toloth beside the sluggish, stone-banked Zoro. Then one night when the moon was full, the travelers came to a mountain crest and looked down upon the myriad lights of Onai. Peasants had told them they were near, and Aranon knew that this was not his native city of Era. The lights of Onai were not like those of Era, for they were harsh and glaring, while the lights of Era shine as softly and magically as shone the moonlight on the floor by the window where Aranon's mother once rocked him to sleep with song. But Onai was a city of lutes and dancing, so Aranon and Romnod went down the steep slope that they might find men to whom songs and dreams would bring pleasure. And when they were come into the town, they found rose-wreathed revelers, bound from house to house, and leaning from windows and balconies, who listened to the songs of Aranon and tossed him flowers and applauded when he was done. Then for a moment did Aranon believe he had found those who thought and even felt as he, though the town was not 100th as fair as Era. When dawn came, Aranon looked about with dismay, for the domes of Onai were not golden in the sun, but gray and dismal. And the men of Onai were pale with reveling and dull with wine, and unlike the radiant men of Era. But because the people had thrown him blossoms and acclaimed his songs, Aranon stayed on, and with him Romnod, who liked the revelry of the town and wore in his dark hair roses and myrtle. Often at night Aranon sang to the revelers, but he was always as before, crowned only with the vine of the mountains and remembering the marble streams of Era and the Hyaline Nithra. In the frescoed halls of the monarch did he sing, upon a crystal dais raised over a floor that was a mirror, and as he sang he brought pictures to his hearers till the floor seemed to reflect old, beautiful, and half-remembered things, instead of the wine-reddened feasters who pelted him with roses. And the king bade him put away his tattered purple, and clothed him in satin and cloth of gold, with rings of green jade and bracelets of tinted ivory, and lodged him in a gilded and tapestried chamber on a bed of sweet carven wood, with canopies and coverlets of flower-embroidered silk. Thus dwelt Aranon in Onai, the city of lutes and dancing. It is not known how long Aranon tarried in Onai, but one day the king brought to the palace some wild whirling dancers from the Lyranian desert, and dusky flute players from Drinan in the east. And after that the revelers threw their roses, not so much at Aranon as at the dancers and the flute players. And day by day that Romnod, who had been a small boy in granite Toloth, grew coarser and redder with wine, till he dreamed less and less, and listened with less delight to the songs of Aranon. But though Aranon was sad, he ceased not to sing, and at evening told again his dreams of Era, the city of marble and beryl. Then one night the red and fattened Romnod snorted heavily amidst the poppied silks of his banquet couch, and died writhing, whilst Aranon, pale and slender, sang to him in a far corner. And when Aranon had wept over the grave of Romnod, and strewn it with green budding branches, such as Romnod used to love, he put aside his silks and gauds, and went forgotten out of Onai, the city of lutes and dancing, clad only in the ragged purple in which he had come, and garlanded with fresh vines from the mountains. Into the sunset wandered Aranon, seeking still for his native land and for men who would understand and cherish his songs and dreams. In all the cities of Sidrathia and in the lands beyond the Brazic desert, gay-faced children laughed at his olden songs and tattered robe of purple. But Aranon stayed ever young, and wore wreaths upon his golden head whilst he sang of Era, delight of the past and hope of the future. So came he one night to the squalid cot of an antique shepherd, carvings on the hellish altar, but it was alive. Nature had never... I think it skipped a page. It skipped several pages. Well, we have an issue. Alright. Give me a minute and I'll get back to where I left off. It's here somewhere. Into the sunset wandered Iranon, seeking still for his native land, and for men who could understand and cherish his songs and dreams. In all the cities of Sidathria and in the lands beyond the Brasnik desert, gay-faced children laughed at his olden songs and tattered robe of purple. But Iranon stayed ever young and wore wreaths upon his golden head whilst he sang of Era, delight of the past and hope of the future. So came he one night to the squalid cot of an antique shepherd, bent and dirty, who kept lean flocks on a stony slope above a quicksand marsh. To this man Iranon spoke, as to so many others. Canst thou tell me where I may find Era, the city of marble and beryl, where flows the Hyalene Nithra, and where the falls of the tiny Craw sing to verdant valleys and hills forested with yath trees? And the shepherd, hearing, looked long and strangely at Iranon, as if recalling something very far away in time, and noted each line of the stranger's face, and his golden hair and his crown of vine leaves. But he was old and shook his head and replied, O stranger, I have indeed heard the name of Era, and the other names thou hast spoken, but they come to me from afar down the waste of long years. I heard them in my youth from the lips of a playmate, a beggar's boy given to strange dreams, who would weave long tales about the moon and the flowers and the west wind. We used to laugh at him, for we knew him from his birth, though he thought himself a king's son. He was comely, even as thou, but full of folly and strangeness, and he ran away when he was small to find those who would listen gladly to his songs and dreams. How often hath he sung to me of lands that never were, and things that never can be. Of Era did he speak much, of Era and the river Nithra, and the falls of the tiny Craw. There would he ever say he once dwelt as a prince, though here we know from his birth. Nor was there ever a marble city of Era, nor those who would delight in strange songs, save in the dreams of my old playmate Iranon, who is gone. And in the twilight, as the stars came out one by one, and the moon cast on the marsh a radiance like that which a child seen quivering on the floor as he rocked to sleep at evening, there walked into the lethal quicksands a very old man, in tattered purple, crowned with withered vine leaves, and gazing ahead as if upon the golden domes of a fair city where dreams are understood. That night something of youth and beauty died in the elder world. And that is the end of that story, and that is a very depressing story. I did not like that story. Let's see how long the next one is. Alright, the next one is The Music of Eric Zahn. I have examined maps of the city with the greatest care, yet have never again found the Rue d'Orsay. These maps have not been modern maps alone, for I know that names change. I have, on the contrary, delved deeply into all the antiquities of the place, and have personally explored every region, of whatever name, which could possibly answer to the street I knew as the Rue d'Orsay. But despite all I have done, it remains an humiliating fact that I cannot find the house, the street, or even the locality where during the last months of my impoverished life as a student of metaphysics at the university, I heard the music of Eric Zahn. That my memory is broken, I do not wonder, for my health, physical and mental, was gravely disturbed throughout my period of my residence at the Rue d'Orsay, and I recall that I took none of my few acquaintances there. But that I cannot find the place again is both singular and perplexing, for it was within a half-hour's walk of the university, and was distinguished by peculiarities which could hardly be forgotten by anyone who had been there. I have never met a person who has seen the Rue d'Orsay. The Rue d'Orsay lay across a dark river bordered by precipitous brick, blear-windowed warehouses, and spanned by a ponderous bridge of dark stone. It was always shadowy along that river, as if the smoke of neighboring factories shut out the sun perpetually. The river was also odorous with evil stenches which I have never smelled elsewhere, and which may some day help me to find it, since I should recognize them at once. Beyond the bridge were narrow cobbled streets with rails, and then came the ascent, at first gradual, but incredibly steep as the Rue d'Orsay was reached. I have never seen another street as narrow and steep as the Rue d'Orsay. It was almost a cliff, closed to all vehicles, consisting in several places of flights of steps, and ending at the top in a lofty evied wall. Its paving was irregular, sometimes stone slabs, sometimes cobblestones, and sometimes bare earth with struggling greenish-gray vegetation. The houses were tall, peak-roofed, incredibly old, and crazily leaning backwards, forwards, and sideways. Occasionally, an opposite pair, both leaning forward, almost met across the street, like an arch, and certainly they kept most of the light from the ground below. There were a few overhead bridges from house to house across the street. The inhabitants of that street impressed me peculiarly. At first I thought it was because they were all silent and reticent, but later decided it was because they were all very old. I do not know how I came to live on such a street, but I was not myself when I moved there. I had been living in many poor places, always evicted for want of money, till at last I came upon that tottering house in the Rue d'Orsay kept by the paralytic Blandet. It was the third house from the top of the street, and by far the tallest of them all. My room was on the 5th story, the only inhabited room there, since the room was almost empty. On the night I arrived, I heard strange music from the peaked garret overhead, and the next day asked old Blandet about it. He told me it was the old German viol player, a strange dumb man who signed his name Eric Zahn, and who played evenings in a cheap theater orchestra, adding that Zahn's desire to play in the night after his return from the theater was the reason he had chosen this lofty and isolated garret room, whose single gable window was the only point on the street from which one could look over the terminating wall at the declivity and panorama beyond. Thereafter I heard Zahn every night, and although he kept me awake, I was haunted by the weirdness of his music. Knowing little of the art myself, I was yet certain that none of his harmonies had any relation to music I had heard before, and concluded that he was a composer of highly original genius. The longer I listened, the more I was fascinated, until after a week I resolved to make the old man's acquaintance. One night, as he was returning from his work, I intercepted Zahn in the hallway and told him I would like to know him and be with him when he played. He was a small, lean, bent person, with shabby clothes, blue eyes, grotesque, satyr-like face, and nearly bald head, and if my first words seemed both angered and frightened. My obvious friendliness, however, finally melted him, and he grudgingly motioned for me to follow him up the dark, creaking, and rickety attic stairs. His room, one of only 2 in the steeply pitched garret, was on the west side, toward the high wall that formed the upper end of the street. Its size was very great, and seemed the greater because of its extraordinary bareness and neglect. Of furniture there was only a narrow iron bedstead, a dingy washstand, a small table, a large bookcase, an iron music rack, and 3 old-fashioned chairs. Sheets of music were piled in disorder about the floor. The walls were of bare boards and had probably never known plaster, whilst the abundance of dust and cobwebs made the place seem more deserted than inhabited. Evidently Eric Zann's world of beauty lay in some far cosmos of the imagination. Motioning me to sit down, the dumb man closed the door, turned a large wooden bolt, and lighted a candle to augment the one he had brought with him. He now removed his viol from its moth-eaten covering, and taking it, seated himself in the least uncomfortable of the chairs. He did not employ the music rack, but offering no choice and playing from memory, enchanted me for over an hour with strains I had never heard before. Strains which must have been of his own devising. To describe their exact nature is impossible, for one unversed in music. They were a kind of fugue, with recurrent passages of the most captivating quality, but to me were notable for the absence of any of the weird notes I had overheard from my room below on other occasions. These haunting notes I had remembered, and had often hummed and whistled inaccurately to myself, so when the player at length laid down his bow, I asked him if he would render some of them. As I began my request, the wrinkled satire-like face lost the bored placidity it had possessed during the playing, and seemed to shew the same curious mixture of anger and fright which I had noticed when first I accosted the old man. For a moment I was inclined to use persuasion, regarding rather lightly the whims of senility, and even tried to awaken my host's weirder mood by whistling a few of the strains to which I had listened the night before. But I did not pursue this course for more than a moment, for when the dumb musician recognized the whistled air, his face grew suddenly distorted with an expression wholly beyond analysis, and his long, cold, and bony right hand reached out to stop my mouth and silence the crude imitation. As he did this, he further demonstrated his eccentricity by casting a startled glance toward the lone curtained window, as if fearful of some intruder. A glance doubly absurd, since the garret stood high and inaccessible above all the adjacent roofs, this window being the only point on the steep street, as the concierge had told me, from which one could see over the wall at the summit. The old man's glance brought Blandit's remark to my mind, and with a certain capriciousness I felt a wish to look out over the wide and dizzying panorama of moonlit roofs and city lights beyond the hilltop, which of all the dwellers in the Rue d'Orsay only this crabbed musician could see. I moved towards the window, and would have drawn aside the nondescript curtain, when with a frightened rage even greater than before the dumb lodger was upon me again, this time motioning with his head towards the door as he nervously strove to drag me thither with both hands. Now thoroughly disgusted with my host, I ordered him to release me, and told him I would go at once. His clutch relaxed, and as he saw my disgust and offense, his own anger seemed to subside. He tightened his relaxing grip, but this time in a friendly manner, forcing me into a chair, then with an appearance of wistfulness crossing to the littered table, where he wrote many words with a pencil in the labored French of a foreigner. The note which he finally handed me was an appeal for tolerance and forgiveness. Sand said that he was old, lonely, and afflicted with strange fears and nervous disorders connected with his music and with other things. He had enjoyed my listening to his music, and wished I would come again and not mind his eccentricities. But he could not play to another his weird harmonies, and could not bear hearing them from another, nor could he bear having anything in his room touched by another. He had not known until our hallway conversation that I could overhear his playing in my room, and now asked me if I would arrange with Blandit to take a lower room where I could not hear him in the night. He would, of course, defray the difference in rent. As I sat deciphering the execrable French, I felt more lenient toward the old man. He was a victim of physical and nervous suffering, as was I, and my metaphysical studies had taught me kindness. In the silence there came a slight sound from the window. The shutter must have rattled in the night wind, and for some reason I started almost as violently as did Eric Zann. So when I had finished reading, I shook my host by the hand and departed as a friend. The next day, Blandock gave me a more expensive room on the 3rd floor, between the apartments of an aged moneylender and the room of a respectable upholsterer. There was no one on the 4th floor. It was not long before I found that Zaun's eagerness for my company was not as great as it had seemed while he was persuading me to move down from the 5th floor. He did not ask me to call on him, and when I did call, he appeared uneasy and played listlessly. This was always at night. In the day he slept and would admit no one. My liking for him did not grow. From the attic room and the weird music seemed to hold an odd fascination for me. I had a curious desire to look out of that window, over the wall and down the unseen slope at the glittering roofs and spires which must lie outspread there. Once I went up to the garret during theater hours when Zaun was away, but the door was locked. What I did succeed in doing was to overhear the nocturnal playing of that dumb old man. At first I would tiptoe up to my old 5th floor. Then I grew bold enough to climb the last creaking staircase to the peaked garret. There in the narrow hall, outside the bolted door with the covered keyhole, I often heard sounds which filled me with an indefinable dread, the dread of vague wonder and brooding mystery. It was not that the sounds were hideous, for they were not, but that they held vibrations suggesting nothing on this globe of earth, and that at certain intervals they assumed a symphonic quality which I could hardly conceive as produced by one player. Certainly Erich Zaun was a genius of wild power. As the weeks passed, the playing grew wilder, whilst the old musician acquired an increasing haggardness and furtive pitiful to behold. He now refused to admit me at any time, and shunned me whenever we met on the stairs. Then one night I listened at the door. I heard the shrieking viol swell into a chaotic babble of sound, a pandemonium which would have led me to doubt my own shaking sanity, had there not come from behind that barred portal a piteous proof that the horror was real, the awful, inarticulate cry which only a mute can utter, and which rises only in moments of the most terrible fear or anguish. I knocked repeatedly at the door, but received no response. Afterward I waited in the black hallway, shivering with cold and fear, till I heard the poor musician's feeble effort to rise from the floor by the aid of a chair. Believing him just conscious after a fainting fit, I renewed my rapping, at the same time calling out my name reassuringly. I heard Zaun stumble to the window and close both shutter and sash, then stumble to the door, which he falteringly unfastened to admit me. This time his delight at having me present was real, for his distorted face gleamed with relief while he clutched at my coat as a child clutches at its mother's skirts. Shaking pathetically, the old man forced me into a chair, whilst he sank into another, beside which his viol and bowl lay carelessly on the floor. He sat for some time inactive, nodding oddly, but having a paradoxical suggestion of intense and frightening listening. Subsequently he seemed to be satisfied, and crossing to a chair by the table, wrote a brief note, handed it to me, and returned to the table, where he began to write rapidly and incessantly. The note implored me, in the name of mercy and for the sake of my own curiosity, to wait where I was while he prepared a full account in German of all the marvels and terrors which beset him. I waited, and the dumb man's pencil flew. It was perhaps an hour later, while I still waited, and while the old musician's feverishly written sheets still continued to pile up, that I saw Zaun start as from the hint of a horrible shock. Thank you for the follow, Kulia. We'll call you Kulia. Thank you for the follow. Unmistakably, he was looking at the curtained window and listening shudderingly. Then I half fancied I heard a sound myself, though it was not a horrible sound, but rather an exquisitely low and infinitely distant musical note, suggesting a player in one of the neighboring houses, or in some abode beyond the lofty wall over which I had never been able to look. Upon Zaun the effect was terrible, for dropping his pencil suddenly he rose, seized his viol, and commenced to rend the night with the wildest playing I had ever heard from his bow, save when listening at the barred door. It would be useless to describe the playing of Erich Zaun on that dreadful night. It was more horrible than anything I had ever overheard, because I could now see the expression on his face, and could realize that this time the motive was stark fear. He was trying to make a noise to ward something off or drown something out. What I could not imagine, awesome though I felt it must be. The playing grew fantastic, delirious, and hysterical, yet kept to the last the qualities of supreme genius which I knew this strange old man possessed. I recognized the air. It was a wild Hungarian dance popular in the theaters, and I reflected for a moment that this was the first time I had ever heard Zan play the work of another composer. Louder and louder, wilder and wilder, mounted the shrieking and whining of that desperate viol. The player was dripping with an uncanny perspiration and twisted like a monkey, always looking frantically at the curtained window. In his frenzied strains, I could almost see shadowy satyrs and bacchanals dancing and whirling insanely through seething abysses of clouds and smoke and lightning. And then I thought I heard a shriller, steadier note that was not from the viol, a calm, deliberate, purposeful, mocking note from far away in the west. At this juncture, the shutter began to rattle in a howling night wind which had sprung up outside as if in answer to the mad playing within. Zan's screaming viol now outdid itself, emitting sounds I had never thought a viol could emit. The shutter rattled more loudly, unfastened, and commenced slamming against the window. Then the glass broke shiveringly under the persistent impacts, and the chill wind rushed in, making the candles sputter and rustling the sheets of paper on the table, where Zan had begun to write out his horrible secret. I looked at Zan and saw that he was past conscious observation. His blue eyes were bulging, glassy, and sightless, and the frantic playing had become a blind, mechanical, unrecognizable orgy that no pen could ever suggest. A sudden gust, stronger than the others, caught up the manuscript and bore it toward the window. I followed the flying sheets in desperation, but they were gone before I reached the demolished panes. Then I remembered my old wish to gaze from this window, the only window in the Rue d'Ossai, from which one might see the slope beyond the wall and the city outspread beneath. It was very dark, but the city's lights always burned, and I expected to see them there amidst the rain and wind. Yet when I looked from that highest of all gable windows, looked while the candles sputtered and the insane viol howled with the night wind, I saw no city spread below, and no friendly lights gleaming from remembered streets, but only the blackness of space illimitable. Unimaginable space alive with motion and music, and having no semblance to anything on earth. And as I stood there looking in terror, the wind blew out both the candles in that ancient peat garret, leaving me in savage and impenetrable darkness with chaos and pandemonium before me, and the demon madness of that night-baying viol behind me. I staggered back in the dark without the means of striking a light, crashing against the table, overturning a chair, and finally groping my way to the place where the blackness screamed with shocking music. To save myself and Eric Zahn, I could at least try, whatever the powers opposed to me. Once I thought some chill thing brushed me, and I screamed, but my scream could not be heard above the hideous viol. Suddenly, out of the blackness, the madly sawing bow struck me, and I knew I was close to the player. I felt ahead, touched the back of Zahn's chair, and then found and shook his shoulder in an effort to bring him to his senses. He did not respond, and still the viol shrieked on without slackening. I moved my hand to his head, whose mechanical nodding I was able to stop, and shouted in his ear that we must both flee from this unknown things of the night. But he neither answered me nor abated the frenzy of his unutterable music, while all through the garret strange currents of wind seemed to dance in the darkness and babble. When my hand touched his ear, I shuddered, though I knew not why. Till I felt the still face, the ice-cold, stiffened, unbreathing face whose glassy eyes bulged uselessly into the void. And then, by some miracle finding the door and the large wooden bolt, I plunged wildly away from that glassy-eyed thing in the dark, and from the ghoulish howling of that accursed viol whose fury increased even as I plunged. Leaping, floating, flying down those endless stairs through the dark house, racing mindlessly out into the narrow, steep, and ancient street of steps and tottering houses, clattering down steps and over cobbles to the lower streets and the putrid canyon-walled river, panting across the great dark bridge to the broader, healthier streets and boulevards we know. All these are terrible impressions that linger with me, and I recall that there was no wind, and that the moon was out, and that all the lights of the city twinkled. Despite my most careful searches and investigations, I have never since been able to find the Rue d'Orsay. But I am not wholly sorry, either for this or for the loss of undreamable abyss of the closely written sheets which alone could have explained the music of Erickson. And with that, I think that I am going to end the stream and maybe continue with these stories or go back to The Wizard of Oz for the next stream. I don't know which yet. But there will be more reading, because I definitely enjoy reading for you guys. So let's see who we will go and visit now. Let's see who is online. Yeah, it looks like not very many people are on, so I'm gonna send you over to the pigeons. So thank you for hanging out with me on the stream and listening while I read. I hope you enjoyed it and that you have a good rest of your night. And I'm going to send you over to Kiko Pigeons, where you can watch birdies and enjoy their sounds. And come on. There we go. So have a good night, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your night.